Marvel managed to snag the rights to X-Men back in 2019, and Jonathan Hickman was given the reins to help guide the mutants back home. After 24 years of different timelines, events and storylines, Jonathan needed something radical to give the X-Men a new direction, which led to the House of X and Powers of X comics, two 6-issue series intended to be intertwined together. In House of X, Charles Xavier reveals his master plan for Mutantkind, one that'll bring mutants out of humankind's shadow. Meanwhile, Powers of X reveal Mutantkind's secret history, changing the way you'll look at every X-Men story before and after, but sowing the seeds of past may mess up the future. So without further ado, let's dive right in. The not-so-fateful meeting. It's a bright sunny spring morning, and the smell of pollen fills the air as Charles Xavier walks through the town fair. After taking a look around, he takes a seat on a secluded bench. He looks up, and the birds taking flight seem to catch his eye. It's then that Moira approaches the young Xavier, a glint of mischievousness in her eyes as she tries to play coy. She takes a seat on the secluded bench next to Charles as she starts talking about the fair. Moira feels the fair is a distraction from daily problems, and Charles agrees, although something about the fair can't help but fill the young Xavier with joy and a sense of hope. In her head, Moira knows Charles all too well. It's this optimism that made her fall head over heels for him in the first place. She knows Charles has a dream where mutants and humans survive side by side, a frivolous dream in Moira's opinion. You see, this isn't the first time Moira's meeting Charles. Moira is a mutant herself, and a very unique one. Moira has the power of reincarnation. Thus, every time she dies, she begins her life back again from her birth. The only difference, she remembers everything from her past life. All her past lives, which is why her face fills with sorrow when Charles talks about his dream. She knows all too well that Charles's dream will never come true, at least not without radical approaches. Her cryptic words take Charles by surprise as the young Xavier realizes that Moira might not be the stranger he thinks she is. "Who are you?" he asks, and Moira replies, "Why don't you read my mind, Charles? Read my mind and see." Charles holds his fingers up to his head and begins reading Moira's mind. He furrows his brow as he experiences distaste, disgust, anguish, and then pain. Lots of pain. Charles gets to see all of Moira's past lives, and so do we. If you liked the video and our effort up until now, please consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons. They may be 2 small clicks for you, but they help us in marvelous ways. And now, let's continue. Moira's first and second life. Moira was born to loving parents in the late 20th century. She had a normal life, except for the sudden bout of high fever she experienced when she turned 13. Her parents or doctor didn't know it yet, but Moira was mutating. She recovered faster than she'd fallen ill the very next day, disproving a doctor's prognosis that she might not survive. She went on to live a normal life, a full life. She had a loving husband, 3 children, and eventually 8 grandchildren. In her first life, Moira experienced the pinnacle of happiness, the pinnacle of joy. She led the perfect life. Moira passed away in her sleep at the age of 74, surrounded by her loved ones, and was buried on the family property underneath her favorite oak tree. But as soon as she passed away, she was reincarnated. This time, Moira gained consciousness, was sentient while in her mother's womb. This was Moira's second life, and in those 9 months spent in the womb, she planned how she wanted to lead her life again. Moira describes her experience in the womb as neuroleptic, something she suspects is a result of human biology. Thus, she knows all too well that in her mother's womb, she was safe. It's the outside she had to worry about, especially now that she had to keep the knowledge of her past life a secret. Naturally, due to her wisdom, Moira was considered a savant since childhood. She was exceptionally smart, but Moira still felt like she was missing something. Young Moira still didn't know in her second life yet, but she was a mutant. But she desperately wanted to find out, which is why she didn't protest when she was pushed in the direction of academia by her parents and teachers. Moira would go on to study psychology and biology at Oxford University, something she hoped would help her better understand her condition. Her experiments proved that her memories of past life weren't hallucinations or some form of psychosis. As she led her life, she came to realize that if she was a passive participant, things would continue to happen as they'd done previously. And if she was an active participant in her life, she could change what happened, making her life diverge. But what Moira failed to account for was the observer effect, something she'd learned in the early years of her education. Reliving the same life wasn't for her, and people in her life could see that. Her husband, whom she loved dearly in her past life, could see that, the contempt and disdain in her eyes. And thus Moira wouldn't have a family in this life, her second one, no children and no grandchildren. Her only goal? To find if there were other people like her in the world. Charles Xavier. She'd heard the name before, at Oxford, a young prodigy like her. She'd often see him in passing when at the college bar on the lower ground floor of the Talbot building. This is why it was a surprise when she watched Xavier take to the news in her second life and say, "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Charles Xavier." also known as Professor X, and I am a mutant. This is what Moira needed. She knew she might be a mutant too, which is why she booked the first flight back to Oxford the very next day. Sadly, fate had different plans. The plane crashed, and thus Moira's second life came to a tragic end. Moira's third life. Moira's third life started the same. She was sentient in her mother's womb, but this time she knew what to do. She plunged into the world of science from an early age and took up anthropology and genetics when at Oxford. And this time, she actively sought out Charles. And while spending time with Charles as he hid his true self from the world, Moira confirmed that she was indeed a mutant. But she had a distaste for her powers. She felt them to be a curse. She couldn't read minds or manipulate reality. She was just cursed to be born again and again. This distaste, combined with Charles's surface-level arrogance and god complex, only drove her further away, enough that Moira starts looking for a cure for mutants in her third life. Moira goes on to complete her studies at Oxford and then begins searching for a cure. After a few years, Moira and her team of humans finally manage to find a cure that eradicates the mutant gene. But this is when things go awry. She never gets a chance to use it. The day she finds the cure is the day her lab goes up in flames and her colleagues at the lab are killed. One by one, mercilessly. Moira is now tied to a chair in a burning lab as Mystique and Destiny approach her. Destiny can see the future and has seen what Moira's cure is going to do for the mutant kind, which is why they plan to put an end to her. Along with her cure, Destiny is curious about Moira, because she can't see her or her future. The clairvoyant mutant can, however, see the ripples of time and space bend around Moira's presence. Destiny has been blind since birth, which is why Mystique assists her in talking to Moira as Destiny sits in a chair in front of her. Destiny knows Moira's mutant power is reincarnation, and she feels Moira has used it only to betray her own kind. But Moira goes on to express how her powers are a curse. How they're a curse for a lot of mutants and the cure is only meant for those that actually want it. Moira is too naive. Destiny is quite keen on enlightening Moira. She tells her that she's seen the future. Moira never gets to control her cure once she synthesizes it. Humans use the cure to eradicate all mutants. Moira doesn't know the extent of Destiny's power, so Destiny explains. She lets Moira know that she'll always see the cure coming and prevent it in every life Moira lives. Destiny will also see Moira coming to kill her, that is, if she ever tries. Moira doesn't know it yet, but Destiny and Moira's future are intertwined. Change or die. Help your people, or I'll annihilate you in all your lives to come, says Destiny. And this leaves Moira thinking. She's speechless. Mystique sees Moira is still on the fence, and so Destiny proceeds to tell Moira more. Moira doesn't have infinite lives. She won't reincarnate every time she dies. Destiny can only see 10 lives of Moira, and that too if she makes the correct choices. Moira doesn't believe her, but Destiny has another race up her sleeve. She informs Moira that if she dies before her mutant powers manifest, that if she dies as a kid, she won't reincarnate. So the question Destiny now poses to Moira is that, does Moira see the truth? Does Moira realize her conundrum and plan to change her ways? Will she help the mutant kind with her remaining lives? Well, there's only one way to find out. Destiny calls in Pyro, the fire-wielding mutant. She commands Pyro to burn Moira slowly, so she remembers what it feels like in her next life. Without a second thought, Pyro ignites Moira in flames. Her screams echo through the burnt lab, and thus, Moira's third life comes to a brutal end. Moira's fourth life. In this life, Moira doesn't waste time. With knowledge of psychology, biology, anthropology, and genetics on her hand from her past lives, Moira begins researching the conflict between Homo sapiens and Homo superiors, something she'd go on to call the human-mutant dilemma. She realizes that whenever two aggressive species like Homo sapiens and Homo superior share the same biome, the same environment, evolution demands one thing, either adaptation or dominance. This makes Moira look at mutants in a different light. Maybe she was wrong about her kind. As she continues with her new perspective, she sees Xavier in a new light as well. She now understands the reason for Charles's arrogance and confidence. She sees a mutant fighting to find his kind a place in this world. Fighting to find people like Moira a place in this world. This time, Moira continues meeting Charles at the Oxford bar, and one fine night, she finally kisses him mid-conversation. She falls in love with Charles, and so does he. Moira spends the rest of her fourth life standing alongside Charles every step of the way, standing beside him as he forms the X-Men, still as a rock beside him as the X-Men take on the evils of the world, as they take on other mutants, as they take on humans and their hate. But it ends as Destiny had foreseen, with the rise of Sentinels and the fall of Mutantkind. Sentinels are adaptive AI-powered mutant-hunting robots designed by Dr. Bolivar Trask, and in every future Destiny had seen, they've always been the end for Mutantkind, for Charles, for Moira. And Moira experiences this firsthand at the end of her fourth life. Moira's fifth life. In her fifth life, Moira is determined and aggressive. She decides to meet Charles as a teenager, well over a decade before she was destined to meet him in her past lives. She lets the teenage Charles into her mind. He sees everything, all her past 3 lives and the end of her last one. Beside Charles as they're both killed off by Sentinels. Charles knows how his dream ends now, only in failure, which only radicalizes his young mind. Determined to thwart Mutantkind's destined demise at the hands of the Sentinels, Charles decides to take it up a notch. Instead of a school for mutants in his life, Charles decides to create a legion. This time, Professor X builds a walled city for all mutants. Hidden inside a crater, their safe haven seems to thrive. However, the end is always the same. Dr. Bolivar Trask creates the Sentinels, and they destroy Charles's safe haven for mutants, killing every mutant on Earth in the process. Moira's sixth life. Post-humans, also known as Homo novissima, were superhumans engineered by Homo sapiens to fight the mutants in the mutant-human war in the 30th century. Sadly, post-humans soon established themselves as the dominant species on Earth. These post-humans had only one goal, thanks to their machine parts, to evolve and continue evolving their civilization. When the Badoon infested the post-human society on Earth, the greatest minds began looking for an alternative. The solar system consists of 10 planets, and the last one is Nibiru. Fabled in Sumerian mythology, this gas giant has a long elliptical orbit that extends beyond the Kuiper Belt. This is the reason why this gas giant was chosen as a viable candidate in the 31st century by post-human scientists. 100 of the greatest post-human scientists, artists, and scholars volunteer to have their minds copied into a single thinking machine developed by them, a Nimbus. This intelligence was housed in a Nimrod shell, a robotic body designed in the image of Sentinels with all the post-human technological advancements. Nimbus was then launched into space, its flight path taking it to Nibiru in approximately 3 years. On its way, Nimbus decided to take a detour and consume Jupiter's moons in the process, Europa and Io. It then went on to consume Saturn's moon, Titan. The intelligence Nimbus calculated that consuming these moons would increase the conversion rate of Nibiru once it reaches the planet. When it finally reached its destination, Nimbus crashed into Nibiru with full force, crashing through the upper crust and mantle, making its way toward the planet's core. Upon reaching the core, Nimbus inserted its self-replicating machines into it, which began transforming the planet. Soon, the iron and nickel core was converted into memory farms and logic crystals. Nimbus, the entire planet, was alive. Its intelligence levels grew until it reached world mind status 10 years after impact. All this effort was done for one reason: to complete the goals of the Outreach Project, to establish an alliance with a Type 3 civilization in an attempt to evolve further. When it comes to galactic and planetary societies, there are 6 types: Machine, Hive, Intelligence, Technarch, World Mind, and Phalanx. Nimbus had achieved the status of the World Mind, thus contact with the Phalanx was now only a few days away. This brings us to present-day Nimbus, 1,000 years into the future. A post-human Homo novissima named the Librarian sits in the archive of Nimrod the Greater, a mutant library where he's trying to read and copy all the data he can. He's joined by Nimrod the Greater himself, but he no longer possesses his original robotic shell, a body. Instead, he now exists as a floating drone. In the distance, a chimera mutant's body is suspended in liquid as it slowly rots away. The Librarian tells Nimrod the Greater that they're losing the mutants that formed the library, and there's not much the Librarian can do about it. Nimrod the Greater, who uses this database of living mutants as the source of its intelligence, doesn't mind. He knows he wasn't built to last this long, not as long as he has, a millennium. They talk about the past, slowly making their way out of the library. The structures in the post-human society are tall, encompassing huge spaces. Silence fills every nook and cranny, but despite the large structures, there's an odd peacefulness about the environment. The Librarian tells Nimrod that he's served his purpose. His collective consciousness, the living database of mutants that he is, helped them win the human-machine mutant war. But how that war now seems pointless in hindsight, now that they're so far ahead in the future. They make their way to the walkway overlooking the entire city and stare at a large sphere in the middle. It's an artificial biome, and the post-humans are preserving something inside it. Something from their past. The Librarian walks over to the city center with Nimrod in his tow. Everybody seems to gather there. Elders, priests, children, everyone. The post-humans have always wanted to evolve their society further, and the next step in their evolution is ascension. The first step in this process was creating a world mind on Nimbus which would show the universe what the post-humans are capable of. So, Librarian, did it work? Asks Nimrod as a dark, shapeless cloud of black matter approaches from the sky above. I think we're about to find out, says the Librarian. The large cloud of black matter nears the city, and then a smaller part of it branches off. It makes its way toward the city center. The smaller cloud of black matter then seemingly turns to fine particles. These particles split into 3 equal parts, and each part then takes a vaguely humanoid form, slowly phasing in and out of reality. We, Phalanx, ate your world mind, says the first one. its voice inhuman, echoing in the city with a certain rasp never heard before. The Phalanx go on to tell the post-humans how they consumed their world mind, how the mutants' minds that were a part of it fought for sovereignty but lost, how the Phalanx now recognize the post-humans and have heard them. "What do you see?" asks the first Phalanx that took form, its humanoid body improving by each passing second, reflecting circuitry, organic mass, armor, and more. The eldest of the post-humans steps forward and says, "Ascension." A Phalanx is an interstellar society operating on a galactic scale. They have total control over the galaxy they control, and their sole goal is to consume lesser societies to increase their own intellect. A society that's deemed worthy is assimilated into the Phalanx, and this process is called ascension. The eldest post-human offers himself for ascension, hoping that the Phalanx accept. The 3 members of the Phalanx race that descended are now fully formed. The organic matter in them seems to glow, and each has a distinctly different form. As the Elder offers himself up, he has a seer self as well, a robotic drone containing the Elder's consciousness. After that, once the Elder confirms that he wants it done, the Phalanx member grabs the Elder's seer self, which slowly begins to transform into the black matter that the Phalanx are made of, and then, poof, it disintegrates the very next second. The Elder is shocked. He pauses and then asks if he's now a part of the Phalanx. The answer seems to be yes, but the Elder wants confirmation, and there's only one way to know. The Phalanx should now know the sequence of events that happened years ago, which only the Elder does. The Phalanx respond, "There was a city on the mountain, and behind its sun shone brightly, and then too brightly as it expanded to consume the city, the mountain, the world." Expectations versus reality. It's confirmed. The Elder is in there, somewhere. But the question still remains if the Phalanx find this form of ascension through a drone printed with someone's consciousness acceptable. When asked about it, the 3 Phalanx members leave their humanoid forms. Their matter binds together to form a single entity, a large sphere with spikes. It looks like an eye. The Phalanx ask the Elder to wait. They're awaiting a response from someone. The eldest student explains to the librarian what just happened, how the Phalanx, being technological constructs, only consume and assimilate machines. This is why the Elder chose to imprint his consciousness into a drone instead, to assist with the process. As some time has passed, the giant eye responds that the Phalanx have an answer. The eye soon turns to the black-colored matter as earlier, and now forms a single humanoid entity, a replica of the Elder. It reaches out with its arm extended as it touches the Elder on the cheek. "These are our terms," it says as it goes on to land a soft kiss on the Elder's forehead. Just like the drone earlier, the Elder disintegrates into the same black matter the very next second. The librarian is now back at the library alongside Nimrod, confused about what just happened. If the Elder's seer self had ascended, then why did the Phalanx kill his physical form? Nimrod then goes on to explain that the Phalanx are like them, like the machines humans created in their image. In this case, the Phalanx are just like Nimrod, made up of self-replicating smaller machines that can take any form. And like Nimrod, their creators made them in their image, so they're likely made up of smaller machines as well. However, Nimrod goes on to theorize that unlike technological machines, the Phalanx's masters are likely made up of elementary matter, universal particles like electrons, protons, leptons, and kerbons. This in turn leaves the question of density. How dense are the Phalanx's masters if they're made up of universal particles? This is because once a particle is dense enough, it can collapse space and time in on itself. It could become a singularity, a black hole. This is the moment the librarian remembers the Titan theory, a theory that states that inside every black hole is a supermachine brain containing the collective intelligence of a society. The collective intelligence of a society so advanced that the supermachine brain collapsed in on itself. But Nimrod is one step ahead of the librarian and the scholar who posited the Titan theory. Because, while this theory is correct, it only takes into account independent Titan societies, a single supermachine brain that collapsed in on itself. Nimrod, however, imagines greater. He explains that because a black hole is also an Einstein-Rosen bridge, a way to connect a singularity to other singularities in the universe, they have to consider that all singularities, all the black holes in the universe, are just one single supermachine brain, one giant societal intelligence that spans the entire universe. Thus comes the answer to the question as to why the Phalanx destroyed the Elder. They're following orders, and while Ascension might get one to be a part of the Titan at the heart of every black hole, the Phalanx need energy to operate. This is why, during the Ascension process, they destroy everything in their wake, converting matter to energy. It's how they thrive as they serve their masters. Nimrod concludes by saying, "Tomorrow they will absorb our collective intelligence into theirs, and the history and consciousness of this planet will live on forever. But in doing so, they will feed, consuming this entire planet, leaving no living thing behind." This idea terrifies the librarian, but then he remembers something. He quickly makes his way to the glowing biome at the heart of the city. the one they call the Preserve. As the librarian enters the Preserve, we see lush green trees, flora and fauna from Earth, all mutated genetically. Suddenly, a man leaps at the librarian, who orders him to stop midway. The librarian's too fast, too smart, and we see that it's the mutants attacking him. The librarian tells his attacker telepathically that his augmented brain is far more advanced than theirs. Before their brain's command can reach their limbs, he can find 100 ways to avert them. The librarian comes in peace and offers them food. He continues talking to the mutant that leaped at him while others eagerly move towards the food. He's talking to Logan, to Wolverine. Wolverine has grown old, the white in his hair clearly giving away his age. They talk about freedom, how the librarian thinks this biome is the best place for them, but Logan thinks it's a zoo. Logan tells the librarian that he talks to the other mutants about freedom each day, about revolution each day, about rising up. Librarian finds this effort on Logan's part futile, but Wolverine has hopes. He just needs more time. While this conversation has been happening telepathically, the librarian finally moves his lips and speaks in English, a long, dead language, almost 1,000 years old, and says, "But you have no more time, Logan Howlett James." This surprises Logan. He hasn't heard the librarian speak English before. The librarian tells him that he's learned English in the hopes of having a conversation, an honest conversation with Logan. And Logan can't wait to hear what he has to say. But the librarian is waiting for someone else, waiting for her. Before we move ahead, a quick summary of the types of universal societies that exist: Titans, Strongholds, and Dominions. Titans, as discussed, are independent superintelligence societies that are so advanced that they collapse in on themselves to form a singularity. Strongholds, on the other hand, aren't independent. They're a network of 5 or fewer Titans that are connected together. And lastly, we have a Dominion. Dominions are a collective of 10 or more Titans. A Dominion collective dominates a particular sector or sectors of space in terms of both area and time. And although the definition states 10 or more, the actual number of societies are far greater, usually in the hundreds. All universal societies exist in atemporal space. Now, back to the story. The 1,000-year wait. We now see who the librarian has been waiting for. Moira slowly emerges from behind a tree, equally surprised by the librarian speaking in English. The librarian is impressed by Logan and Moira. He tells them how he's seen them survive for the past 1,000 years, depending on each other, how they transfuse Logan's regenerating blood to survive. Lucky that their blood types match. But as impressive as it's been all for nothing. For tomorrow is the Ascension, and everything will be destroyed. The librarian explains how Ascension will see an end to their physical forms, how all posthumans will go on to survive as a part of the hive intelligence of the Phalanx, and how finally, when they journey back to the nearest black hole, they'll merge with the god intellect, Dominion. Once merged with them, posthumans will exist outside of time and space. They'll exist forever. As the librarian finishes telling them about Ascension, shock and horror takes over Moira and Logan's face. They realize that the world is ending tomorrow, and despite having survived for 1,000 years, their lives will end now, all for nothing. But the librarian has different plans. He plans to send Moira off the planet tomorrow. Why? Because if Moira dies before the Ascension, before the posthumans can be assimilated into the Dominion, then it will all be a waste. Moira's death will annihilate this timeline, this reality, once she reincarnates and wakes back up 1,000 years ago when she was born. If that happens, Moira will remember everything. All these 1,000 years while the posthumans will know nothing when they come into existence, which is an inevitability, just like the Sentinels. But if Moira manages to survive the Ascension, then posthumans will exist out of space and time, and they would know everything. But why tell them now, a day before the Ascension? Moira and Logan both wonder the same as the librarian tells them that he's curious. He wants to know how Moira plans to stop the posthumans if she goes back in time. Will she be able to stop the inevitability? He then goes on to explain how the machines they were fighting were just buying posthumans time to evolve, to come into existence, how the Sentinels, Nimrods were the next evolutionary step for humans. Genetic mutations can never compare to the genetic alterations posthumans possess. "I never saw it coming," says Moira, repulsed by the thought, but Wolverine has had enough. As soon as the librarian turns around and lets his guard down, Logan drives his adamantium claws through his neck, nailing the librarian to a tree, killing him instantly. All this time we waited to find out why," says Moira, and now they know. And Moira plans to do something about it. Wolverine's claws slowly dart out as he balls up his fist. He wants Moira to close her eyes, but she wants to keep them open. She wants to remember it all. And Logan promises to make it quick. The artificial sun of the biome sets in the background as Logan plunges his blades into Moira's heart. And that's how Moira's 6th life comes to an end. Moira's 7th life. Moira's out for blood in her 7th life. She trains her body since birth, transforming herself into a killing machine because this time, Moira's going after the entire Trask bloodline. She strangles Bolivar Trask in his home, shoots Donald Trask in his office, kills off Gwyneth using a sniper in the middle of the street, and then takes care of Simon Trask. Once she's done, she goes after their children and kills them. A merciless and brutal Moira thinks she's averted the danger, but AI, evolution, is an inevitability, just like mutants are. She realizes this because AI or Trask's Sentinels weren't an invention, they were a discovery, and if Trask isn't there to discover it, then someone else will, and someone does. The Sentinels look different this time, more sinister, more horrific as they end Moira's 7th life. She dies alone, the life of a killer. Moira's 8th life. Moira isn't done being evil yet, not in her 8th life. She now feels protective for mutants and finds violence to be a necessary evil. And there's someone else that feels this way, an Omega-level mutant, Magneto. She visits Magneto on his island in the Bermuda Triangle and tells him about the future. Everything she's lived so far, every end she's seen, every way she's watched mutants being hunted. This enrages Magneto, enough that he decides to take on the world the very same day. Moira can't do anything about it, but others can. And so, Magneto is stopped by the Avengers and the X-Men, someone Moira thinks of as fools. Unaware of the eventuality, she ends her own life to start again. Moira's 9th life. This time, Moira is desperate. She has only one life left, and desperate times call for desperate measures. She joins powers with Apocalypse and embraces the idea of evolutionary dominance, survival of the fittest. While the world may see Apocalypse as evil, a monster, to Moira, after so many years, thousands of years, Apocalypse was just another solution she had yet to try. Thus adorning a costume similar to Apocalypse, Moira joins him in the fight for dominance. When Moira is 42 years old in her 9th life, the Apocalypse War begins, and they wage war against humanity. 3 years later, they defeat the Avengers, killing every last one of them. It's then that the fabled man-machine supremacy arose, led by Nimrod the Lesser, an intelligent, self-replicating, nearly indestructible evolution of the first Sentinel. What followed was devastation and the population of mutants around the world reaching a crisis point. There was no leadership for mutants during these years, and the constant relocation, attacks and evasion was taking a toll on everyone. This is when, as a desperate measure, the Sinister breeding pits were approved on Mars. Sinister breeding pits led to Mr. Sinister breeding genetically engineered mutants. His first generation of mutants possessed a single X gene. The second generation onwards, genetically bred mutants were called Chimera. The second generation of Chimeras had 2 sets of X genes, which resulted in predictable mutant powers. The third generation of Chimeras was bred with a DNA that featured 5 X genes. Their powers were quite effective against man-machine supremacy, which led most mutants to believe that this was the turning point in the war. But the next generation, the 4th generation of genetically bred mutants, changed that. The 4th generation of mutants were meant to be Omega level, but sadly they were defective, corrupt. They operated on a hive mind which was only discovered once they'd killed more than 40% of the remaining mutants on Earth. Post this devastation, the 4th generation of mutants committed mass suicide back on Mars while causing the destruction of the Sinister pits in the process. Meanwhile, Nimrod the Lesser was busy breeding his own versions of machine-enhanced mutants. This happened during Moira's 88th year in her 9th life. Nimrod created black-brained hound, mutants that were programmed to elicit sympathy from Mutantkind and then betray them in the process. However, these were a failure, as their disposition for treachery led them to betray Nimrod himself. As Mars had been destroyed by this time, mutants established Asteroid K in space, which served as a refuge for the remaining 10 mutants of the X-Men, including Moira and Apocalypse. It was then that 2 more colonies were founded in the Shi'ar space. The first was Benevolence, which was a converted transit station on the far fringes of Shi'ar space. At its peak, Benevolence housed more than 8,000 mutants. The second colony was established in the Shi'ar throne world, Chandilar. This time seemed to be without any conflicts until Moira's 107th year of her 9th life. It's then that Nimrod attempted to assassinate Apocalypse's. Moira was mortally injured during this attempt and was placed in stasis to prevent her reincarnation. The mutants now had only one chance, and 16 years later, after tons of research, they finally had a plan to find Nimrod's origins, giving Moira all the clues to prevent the machine uprising. And this is where our story picks back up again. Percival, aka Emmanuel Cortez, was the only surviving mutant with technological undetectability, a power that allowed him to hide himself and 3 others from any technology in the world. And this power was vital during this war against Nimrod the Lesser. Sadly, Percival now lies in the rubble of the Northern Territory in Nexus on Earth, a place where Nimrod the Lesser houses all of his data. The light fades from his eyes as he's discovered by 2 hunters sent by Nimrod the Lesser. Mutants have now lost their race against the machines. The aftermath. As the 2 hunters realize they can't source any information from Percival's dying mind, Silobel drags herself away from them in the background. Badly injured and bleeding from her mouth, she desperately tries to escape but knows she's been discovered. Silobel is a black-brained hound. She was bred by Nimrod to have telepathic immunity, but soon betrayed him to join the mutants. This is one of the reasons she irks the hunters, as they can't read her mind. They ask her about her friends, why they infiltrated the Nexus. Psylobal tries to act coy about her friend, claiming she's alone. More hunters approach the scene and restrain her. She's surrounded by them, and things aren't looking good. Psylobal has telepathic powers, which is why she's able to hear Rasputin IV telepathically as she hides out of sight. Rasputin IV is a third-generation genetically bred mutant. She possesses the powers of Peter Rasputin, aka Colossus, Quentin Quire, aka Kid Omega, Gunther Bane, aka Eunice the Untouchable, Kitty Pryde, aka Shadowcat, and Laura Kinney, aka Talon. This gives Rasputin IV metal skin, telepathy, force fields, intangibility, and of course, healing factor, making the metal skin soul sword-wielding mutant a force to be reckoned with. She's joined by Cardinal, another genetically enhanced third-generation mutant with the powers of Nightcrawler, Jean Grey, and Ajax. Although a powerhouse, Cardinal can't take part in violence due to his genetic structure. The two look on, hiding in the rubble as Psylobal is interrogated by the hunters. Rasputin considers Psylobal her sister, and she isn't leaving the Nexus without her. Psylobal, on the other hand, is adamant that Rasputin and Cardinal leave without her. She wants them to survive, to complete the mission, and she's ready to give her life for the cause. Suddenly, Psylobal is approached by one of the machine hunters whose limbs slowly approach her head, wires extending from his arms like tentacles. And as they make contact with her black brain, Psylobal's screams echo through the devastated landscape. Cardinal can't watch this as he prepares to plant the black seed, an organic seed from the mutant Krakoa that opens a gateway to any destination. Krakoa controls who can enter through the gateway, which makes it impenetrable by the machines. Rasputin knows that Cardinal won't join her due to his genetic nature to avoid violence at all costs. But she isn't giving up on Psylobal so easily. She won't let Nimrod's hunters take another one of her friends, not again. Rasputin draws her soul sword and leaps through the air, aiming for the Prime Hunter's heads, and as she brings down her sword with full force, the hunter's body shatters into 1,000,000 pieces. Cardinal has already planted the seed, which is beginning to grow. Rasputin knows she just has to hold off the hunters for a few more minutes. This is what she was born to do. Effortlessly, Rasputin stands in between the hunters and Psylobal as she deflects lasers and plasma using her metal skin. Things seem to be going in her favor when suddenly she hears gears clattering and loud groaning echo through the rubble. She knows this sound and immediately throws her hands up in the air, barely managing to catch the Sentinel's hand as it tries to crush her and Psylobal. Not this time. Rasputin thinks to herself as she swings her soul sword, shattering the Sentinel's hand. Undeterred, the Sentinel raises its other arm and sends a blast of plasma toward Rasputin. Although she has metal skin, a direct plasma shot from a Sentinel's cannon will surely destroy her, and it would have if Psylobal hadn't stepped in. Psylobal has summoned a sphere of force field around her as she floats between Rasputin and the Sentinel, deflecting the plasma in all directions. But it's too little and too late. Thousands of Nimrod's hunters now surround Rasputin and Psylobal. As Psylobal is protected by a sphere, they aim for Rasputin. In a couple of seconds, Rasputin is overwhelmed by the sheer number of hunters as Psylobal asks her to escape without her. Unable to give up on her adoptive sister, Rasputin swings her soul sword in all directions in an attempt to carve an escape path. But the hunters keep coming. Rasputin is forced to leave without her, without Psylobal. Nimrod resides on his throne in his monolith when two hunters, who we now see are humans, drag in Psylobal. He's joined by Omega Sentinel, aka Karima Sharpendar, a mutant infected with state-of-the-art nano-implants. The two look on as the human hunters inform Nimrod the Lesser about the recent attack on Nexus. They don't know how the mutants managed to enter and evade them, but they manage to capture Psylobal. Nimrod gets up from his throne as he realizes Psylobal is a black-brained hound, concluding that getting any information from her is going to be tougher than usual. But like any sociopathic robot that's ever existed, Nimrod's ramblings are incoherent at best and psychopathic at worst. Now that the breeding pits are in the past, he finds the existence of Psylobal, any other black hound for that matter, a mistake that should be erased from existence. Confused at first, Psylobal pauses and then says, "If it takes 1,000 years, I swear I'll endure and erase you from existence." Overjoyed, Nimrod clasps his hands together and sarcastically replies, "That's the spirit. I love it." Omega, however, has other plans. She wants to interrogate Psylobal, but as traditional methods won't work, and they can't read her mind, there's only one choice: a brain bath. This is suggested by the male human hunter, and while Omega agrees, she knows passing the data that comes from Psylobal could take years, even decades. And that's when something clicks in Nimrod's brain as he becomes visibly excited like a child. Omega knows what Nimrod plans to do with Psylobal. Psylobal's unwanted induction. With a loud hiss, the ground in the throne room opens up, revealing a set of human-sized stasis containers. One of them, the empty one, sticking out of the top. The male human hunter holds Psylobal in place as the female hunter sedates her. Psylobal tries to resist desperately, screaming and flailing around to no avail. She's grabbed by mechanical tentacles jutting out of the ground and moved toward the empty stasis containers as Nimrod goes on to explain the procedure. These containers are designed to house live mutants in femtofluid, plunging each mutant into suspended animation where they'll be distilled, broken down into nothing but data that will aid in the creation and learning of an AI Nimrod himself is created. Before she is submerged, Psylobal screams at Nimrod, proclaiming that she's not threatened and she's ready to die for what she believes in. And then, Psylobal is submerged, struggling at first, but then soon entering a state of suspended animation in the next few seconds. Nimrod's turned around and is already walking away, his last words to Psylobal being, "Unfortunately, while this is a kind of death, it's not one you can escape from." But the light from Psylobal's eyes is long gone. Back at Krakoa, or what remains of it, Rasputin and Cardinal arrive, arguing about what happened at Nexus. Cardinal wishes he could exchange places with Psylobal. His aversion to violence has let them down, and despite her best efforts, a grieving Rasputin couldn't help but agree with him as her anger takes over. The two meet up with the 4 remaining mutants housed in Krakoa temporarily. North, a mutant with the powers of Polaris, and the White Queen, Emma Frost, Wolverine, and Krakoa, who now possess the body of late Cypher. They're joined by Zorn, aka Death, a mutant with a literal black hole for his face. Rasputin and Cardinal inform the 4 about Percival's death and Psylobal's capture. They've lost too many people in this war. Hoping that the deaths weren't in vain, Wolverine asks if they managed to complete their job. They did, and Wolverine says, "All right, then, follow me. The old man's waiting." The 6 make their way to Asteroid K, where they meet their boss, Apocalypse. Wolverine informs Apocalypse about Percival's demise and Psylobal's capture, and that while they managed to get the information they needed, it won't do them any good as without Percival's powers, they can no longer hide from Nimrod and his machines. But Apocalypse has hope. In these dire times, even when Wolverine seems to be hanging on by a thread, it's Apocalypse that's still determined, unwavering and hell-bent on seeing his job done right. Rasputin hands over what they stole from the Nexus: information, the Nexus's indexing machine. Rasputin goes on to explain to the others that while the machines have information on everything, the problem arises the way in which this information is stored. They record everything that happens, every second, every minute, which makes it difficult to find something in particular in the tons of data they collect, and thus they stole the indexing machine. Rasputin hopes Krakoa, who now possesses Cypher's body, can decipher and decrypt the information so they can find what they need. Of course, what they need isn't the indexing machine they stole, but it'll help point them in the correct direction. Cypher had the powers of omnilingual translation, which have now been passed on to Krakoa. Minutes later, Krakoa has the index decrypted and unlocked, and seconds later he's found the location of the information they're looking for. Wolverine folds his arms in shock and disgust as he broods against the rock wall and says, "You gotta be kidding me. A little mumbly nonsense and the world just opens up. I should have been born with brains." Krakoa points to the information he found in the index. It's the location of a node and the information they're looking for: origins of Nimrod. Wolverine still brooding in the corner. With Percival dead, there's no way to get in and out undetected. He says, "We'll have to fight our way in, hold them off while we get the thing, and then fight our way out. It's a suicide mission. You understand that, right?" All the years of fighting the war, all the losses have clearly taken a toll on Logan, who's grown quite cynical. The others, however, couldn't be more excited. Apocalypse himself sees this mission as the final trial. The final trial to prove their worth as he places his hand on an Egyptian coffin and stares at it ominously. "We will go ahead and take what we need, and then we will return," promises Apocalypse, his face growing angrier by the second. Back on Earth, people gather around and slowly pour into the Church of Ascendancy. A half-human, half-machine priest delivers his daily sermon: machine propaganda. He's joined by a hovering drone as he claims humans to be slaves, and the only way they'll understand their machine masters is by giving in, by embracing the machines and rejecting humanity. He's now moved outside the church, addressing everyone that's gathered around. More and more people pouring in by the minute. 2 nuns, half machine and half human themselves, slowly approach the priest as he has his arms wide open. They offer him a human baby. The priest's hands slowly approach the baby's head and the drone does his bidding. It shoots a beam of plasma and nanoparticles into the baby's left eye, transforming the left side of the baby's face into a machine. Now, having demonstrated what awaits the humans, he concludes by saying, "This is what real worship has taught us. Better to rule in heaven than rule in human hell." Bang! A sudden explosion echoes through the night as part of the church comes crumbling down. The smoke soon gives way, and standing there are the mutants: Zorn, Rasputin, North, and Cardinal, clearly not pleased by the priest's demonstration. Rasputin readies a soul sword as Zorn says with disdain, "I'd hoped for more from humanity. A little more pride, a little more grace. Yet here they are in all their glory," replies Rasputin, gripping the base of a blade tightly, ready for action. No distraction. Back at the monolith, Nimrod is busy going over every piece of information he can find about the recent attack on Nexus. He's trying to figure out what the mutants are planning when Omega informs him of the fire at the Church of Ascendancy while looking out of a large spherical window. Nimrod couldn't care less for the fire, as he says, "Dare I say, let it burn?" "I think so. It's been far too long since we made fire and ash of the humans." Omega has the side of her face now open, revealing the machine parts underneath it. Her eye lights up as she uses her communicator to get the last updates. She informs Nimrod that it's the mutants attacking the church, which puzzles him. The two argue about going to help for a while. Nimrod doesn't want to go and is deeply engrossed in his research. It's then that Omega finally decides to do something about it. Nimrod couldn't care less. Omega flies off, leaving Nimrod busy at his station in the monolith. The fight rages on at the church, with North flinging rubble around and Cardinal plunging his sword through the heart of the priest. The priest knows the Cardinal isn't supposed to kill, but today his eyes are red. Something has changed, and when asked about it, Cardinal goes on to explain that he's consumed a terminal apocalypse seed, a seed that's altered his genetic mutation. It now allows him to be violent in any way he wants, and that's when a loud explosion behind the Cardinal shakes him to his core. He turns around only to watch North disintegrate into nothing under the plasma fire from a Sentinel's cannon. It's Omega, and she's accompanied by every Sentinel in this sector of the planet. But this was the plan all along, to get everyone to them, to distract them. Rasputin and Zorn get ready to face off against Omega. This fight has just begun. Back at the Nexus, Apocalypse, Wolverine and Krakoa have infiltrated Nimrod's archive with little to no resistance. The room is dark, with only the faint blue glow of the logic crystal containers to guide them around. Thousands of containers line up the room and Krakoa guides them through the maze. Thanks to the index machine they stole earlier, he knows exactly where to go to find when Nimrod first came online. Krakoa finds the container housing the logic crystal they need, and within a few minutes he's bypassed security thanks to Cypher's power. As he holds the crystal in his hand, Wolverine tenses up. He sniffs the air and realizes something isn't right. Bang! A loud explosion sends Wolverine and tons of rubble flying away the next moment. It's Nimrod, and he's broken through the concrete wall to confront the mutants. Wolverine slowly gets up. All of his clothes have burned away from the impact, and his left arm is torn clean off of his shoulder. As a curious Nimrod enters the archive, Wolverine's healing factor kicks in as his arm begins to repair itself. This section of the archive contains nothing but old data. Nimrod's curious about what the mutants could want with the old data. A similar fate has befallen the other mutants back at the Church of Ascendancy. Rasputin lies on the ground, the body of Cardinal in her arms with her soul sword raised as Omega hovers over her menacingly. Beside Cardinal's body lies Zorn, badly injured. The glow of his blue flames now turned to grey. Nimrod had suspected the attack on the church to be a distraction, and Omega now has confirmation as Wolverine, Krakoa, and Apocalypse have now been found in the archive. Rasputin knows everything is lost, but she still isn't about to give up as she moves towards Zorn, who's barely hanging on by a thread. She threatens Omega one last time, telling her about the singularity behind Zorn's mask, how removing the mask will consume everything in its vicinity. However, Omega is drunk with confidence. She smiles wickedly and thinks Rasputin is bluffing. This is the push Rasputin needed. It's Rasputin who smiles wickedly this time as she slowly but surely removes Zorn's mask. The very next second, there's a huge explosion as everything in sight is consumed by the black of Zorn's singularity. Back at the archive, Nimrod is having a tough time fighting Apocalypse as he's sent flying through a concrete wall by the oldest mutant. Apocalypse knows it's time as he hands Logan the logic crystal as his arm continues to heal, the red color of his flesh returning by each passing second. Krakoa opens a gateway to Asteroid K as a stubborn Logan insists on staying and wants Apocalypse to go back in his stead. "If you could see what you look like, you'd know how foolish that sounds. Go," says Apocalypse with a hint of care in his voice. This care is a rarity, and which might be the reason why Logan doesn't argue further. He walks through the gateway as he looks back one last time. Nimrod has replicated into 5 different versions of himself as they lunge at Apocalypse, slamming him into the ground. As Apocalypse succumbs to Nimrod's replicates, Wolverine finds the Egyptian sarcophagus back at Asteroid K. He opens the coffin and smoke hisses out of it. Logan says, "Wake up, Moira. I have it." Moira has been genetically altered and now has machine augmentations. Something Apocalypse had foreseen. It would be needed in the nick of time to force-feed information to Moira when they might have only seconds to spare. Moira is still not fully awake as Logan inserts the crystal into the mechanical opening in her chest. Moira convulses, and her body arches as the influx of information takes its toll. But a few seconds later, she's done. "What now?" asks Moira, unaware of what's happened so far. But Logan knows. There's nothing left to save here, at least not in this life. Logan turns around with his adamantium claws drawn and visibly upset for what has to be done next. but Moira reassures him with a smile. She finally has the final piece of the puzzle. Wolverine stabs Moira through the heart with one swift swing of his arm, and thus, the 9th life of Moira ends in the far reaches of space on Asteroid K. Moira's 10th life, Absolution. And this is when we catch up with Moira in the present day, where we left her and Charles at the fair. Moira is sitting on the bench as she watches Charles on the ground slowly coming to terms with everything. He slowly gets back up as the sun is about to set in the background and takes a seat beside Moira, who says, "Hard truths are what's called for when dealing with radical realignments to old ways of thinking." Charles can't believe that they lose, and it's then that Moira informs him of the inevitability that they always lose. Still unable to give up on his dreams, Charles begins grasping at straws. Maybe he can form a different team. Maybe he can train his students better. Maybe he can form a better bond with the humans. Moira knows Charles. He's always been like this hopeful as she leans and kisses him on the lips to shut him up. And as she moves away, she implores Charles to remember what Moira showed him. She's loved him, hated him, and gone through all the complex emotions between these extremes. And through all this, Charles never changed. But now, it's time he did. She gets up, knowing that Charles will fight her. Eric will fight her. But this time, in her last life, she wants them all to be together. All the mutants. Moira offers Charles her hand and holds him close to her as she says, "You've been dreaming the wrong dream, Charles, and it's long past time that you wake up." A saddened Charles realizes what needs to be done as Moira and him walk away into the sunset. Their next destination is an island in the Bermuda Triangle, Island M, home of Magneto. The two arrive by yacht and make their way inside. They're greeted by Magneto from the shadows. He knows Charles is here for a reason, and he wants to know why, even before they enter his home. "I am here for you, old friend," says Charles with an earnest smile across his face. There's nothing more Magneto wants, nothing more than to stand by his friend again. But his dreams and Charles's dreams no longer align. They can't be a part of the same future. Eric has learned this the hard way. It takes a while, but Moira and Charles manage to convince Eric to open his mind, to remove his helmet and to let Charles show him what he's already seen. Magneto reluctantly removes his helmet that helps protect him from Charles's powers as Xavier holds Moira's hands and connects all their minds. Magneto sees his various deaths at the hands of the Sentinels, the Avengers, the humans, and it takes a huge toll on him as he collapses to the ground. Eric realizes Moira's a mutant as he holds his head. Moira hands him his helmet as he gets up, a gesture of friendship. Charles tells Eric that they always lose. Always. And thus this time he has an ambitious plan, and he wants Eric to join them. Magneto takes a deep breath and looks at Charles as he says, "I won't give in an inch. I'll check you at every moment of weakness. And if you falter, know that I will not." "I would expect nothing less," says Charles as the two shake hands. Magneto is now part of the team. With Eric on his side, Charles now sets his sights on Mr. Sinister. Mr. Sinister has been dabbling in genetic mutations and cataloging the entire world's DNA. This is something Charles needs and is a vital part of his plan. Charles and Eric travel to Bar Sinister without Moira to meet Mr. Sinister. They try to convince him to create a comprehensive database of every mutant's DNA, every mutant on Earth. Although Mr. Sinister isn't interested at first, this soon changes once his head is blown clean off his torso by his clone, Mr. Sinister with the mutant gene. Once the new Mr. Sinister takes over the throne and is convinced to carry out his plan, Charles uses his powers to erase his memories of this meeting and any link to Charles or Eric. Mr. Sinister will now continue cataloging and collecting every mutant gene on Earth without any knowledge of why he's doing it, until Charles needs it. Charles now has to focus on the technology he needs, and there's only one man in this universe who can help him with that: Forge. He meets Forge in Dallas, Texas, in Forge's secret underwater home. The two are surrounded by aquatic marine life and corals as Forge pours the professor a drink. Charles wants improvements to Cerebro, improvements that would require enough energy produced by a fusion reactor. It's all hypothetical for now, so the two clink their glasses and continue talking. Charles tells Forge that he's on his 4th generation of Cerebro, but now he wants drastic changes for his 5th one. He wants Cerebro to be able to find any mutant on Earth and to be able to copy any mutant's mind, to create a backup of their being. Forge folds his hands as he wonders about the massive requirements for this upgrade. Firstly, they'll need storage. Tons of storage. Infinite in terms of what human technology is currently capable of. The number of mutants on Earth is increasing with each year, and theoretically, if Charles plans to create a copy of each sentient mutant on Earth, then he's going to need a backup as well. He can't afford to lose that data. Forge is right. Charles plans to have not just one backup, but 5, as he holds up his palms with his fingers outstretched. 1 main unit, 3 backups, and the 4th one for unforeseen circumstances. He grins. Forge sips his drink, clearly expecting Charles to have humongous plans, which is why he comes to their next problem in this plan. unlimited energy and storage requirements. To power such a Cerebro, Charles will need an unlimited power source to keep everything running. He'll also need unlimited storage for his ever-growing 5 backups of each mutant on Earth. Unfortunately, nothing like that currently exists on this planet, says Forge, curious as to how Charles plans on solving this part of the problem. A mischievous smile takes over Charles's face as he tells Forge that he doesn't plan on looking for his unlimited power source and storage on Earth. He's instead eyeing a cloaked antimatter engine of Imperial design that's currently in Earth's orbit. That is going to be the power source. And as for storage, Charles plans to use Shi'ar logic diamonds. Forge is impressed. This is a colossal undertaking, one only Forge can accomplish given his technological prowess thanks to his mutant powers. And Charles knows this as he says, "The only question is, are you or are you not going to build it for me?" And Forge smiles triumphantly. It's been long since he was challenged by something. Solving the puzzle, one piece at a time. Charles has been a busy man, and thanks to what Moira showed him, he's been able to discover mutants previously unknown to him or humankind. And that brings us to present-day Krakoa. Charles and Cypher stand under a tree on a cliff overlooking a beautiful waterfall with Blackbird parked in the background. Cypher can't help but marvel at the beauty of the island. The white noise of the constant water flowing from the waterfall, the distant sunset, beautiful white birds circling the orange sky. He wishes Charles had told him about this impromptu vacation. Sadly, it isn't a vacation. Douglas Ramsey, aka Cypher, is a mutant with omnilingual translation, which grants him superhuman communication abilities. He can communicate, understand, and translate any known or unknown language in the universe, and Charles has plans for him. Dressed in his safari outfit, Charles smiles widely as he introduces Cypher to the island and says, "This is Krakoa." Krakoa is a sentient living island, a mutant, one of the oldest one at that. And although Krakoa was hostile at first, Charles has managed to use his telepathic powers to communicate and form an alliance with the island. Cypher accompanies Charles as he walks deeper into the forest until they arrive at a huge rock structure sticking out of the ground resembling a huge pillar. And it has eyes. Huge, yellow eyes. "Here we are. Say hello, Douglas." Cypher greets Krakoa, who seems to speak in an unknown language. This is the reason Charles brought Cypher to the island, to translate and communicate with Krakoa, or so he thinks. After a few words have been exchanged, Cypher is able to make out the nuances in Krakoa's language and soon he's able to understand him, understand his sadness. Krakoa goes on to tell Cypher how hundreds of years ago he was part of a single sentient landmass named Okara, how there was a mysterious adversary with a twilight sword that split Okara into two, giving birth to Krakoa and his counterpart, Arako. The chasm this split created allowed the mysterious mutant's allies to come through, to wage war against Krakoa, but he was saved by Apocalypse, the first mutant, the warrior god in blue. Apocalypse pushed Arako and the enemies back into the chasm, sent his 4 horsemen after them and then sealed the opening, never to be opened again. It was a thing that had to happen. It was, but Krakoa remains alone, a half, not whole, for now and forever, says Cypher as he finishes translating Krakoa's words. Silence takes over the forest as the weight of this tale settles on Charles's and Cypher's hearts. Sometime later, Charles gets back in the Blackbird without Cypher, and the young mutant knows Charles has a plan up his sleeve. But instead of telling him verbally, Charles shows him telepathically. Cypher yelps in shock as he realizes what Charles wants him to do. He wants Cypher to create a language, to create Krakoan, something that can act as a native language of the mutants. And it'll take a year at most, but Cypher is excited to get to work. Charles throws him a duffel bag with all the necessary supplies he'll need and says, "Best get to it." Fruition, the expected results. Over the next year, Charles' plans come to fruition. Forge sets out to develop the Cerebro while Cypher sets about creating the Krakoan language. After 2 more prototypes, Forge has created the Cerebro Charles needs, Cerebro version 7.0. Before we can understand how the new Cerebro works, let's get familiar with Krakoan flowers. Krakoan flowers are of 3 types: gateway, habitat, and no-place flowers. Gateway flowers have the power to create gateways that can lead to any place in the world, as long as there's another flower planted on the other side. Habitat flowers have the power to create mutant-friendly refuge habitats wherever they're planted. Krakoa has complete oversight over each habitat and gateway created using these flowers. Lastly, no-place flowers are an anomaly. They're non-natural flowers that grow on Krakoa. They're believed to be tumors on the continental mutant. These flowers work just like habitat flowers. However, Krakoa has no oversight over them. Now, back to the Cerebro version 7.0 created by Forge. The plan was to initially use a Shi'ar antimatter engine to power the Cerebro, but it was too volatile, and thus Forge resorted to using a converted no-place vent to act as an unlimited power source for the latest version of Cerebro. Shi'ar logic diamonds are still used to store data, and they're housed in Cerebro cradles, 5 of which have been created and hidden all over the world as Xavier had requested. This Cerebro unit is completely portable and can be worn as a helmet by Charles. Charles uses Cerebro 7.0 to make weekly backup copies of every mutant mind on Earth. These backups are not hard backups, they're backups of the essence of each mutant. They essentially contain information on how each mutant feels, how they think, their memories. Weekly updates ensure the latest feelings, thought processes and memories are updated in Charles's database. This process takes Xavier approximately 3 hours to complete. Then come the yearly backups, also called hard backups. These backups are performed each year, and a fresh copy of each mind of every mutant on the planet is backed up. It takes Xavier 3 days to complete this process, and he cannot be interrupted or disturbed while it's being carried out. In the process of making and overseeing this technology, Forge has gone on to become one of the pioneers of Krakoan technology. His prowess over traditional technology and Krakoan biological technology remains unmatched. During the same year, on Krakoa, Cypher has managed to develop the Krakoan language. It's an autochthonous language, but is a manufactured one. It isn't the native language Krakoa speaks. That language is untranslatable, and most minds in the universe, be it human or mutant, are incapable of comprehending or communicating in it. Cypher is the only exception. While creating the language, Cypher also developed a system where any mutant that arrives on Krakoa for the first time will have the Krakoan language imprinted on them by a resident telepath. Once imprinted, the mutant will be able to speak, read, and write in Krakoan fluently. During this year, Charles also has his fellow mutants plant habitat flowers across the world and beyond. Flowers are planted in Westchester, in the blue area of the moon, on Mars, in the Savage Land, Washington, D.C., Jerusalem, and other prominent places. The third recruit. Charles and Magneto travel to Paris, France to enlist their next recruit, Emma Frost, the White Queen herself. Emma is a part of the Hellfire Club and has telepathic powers on par with Charles himself. The two find Emma in the Louvre as she empties the museum upon detecting Charles's presence. Xavier wears the latest version of Cerebro as he greets Emma. Upon seeing Eric and Charles together, she knows whatever they're going to ask of her is either going to be extremely reckless or incredibly heroic. Emma leads the Hellfire Corporation, a worldwide logistics company that interests Charles and his latest venture. Charles is going to introduce miracle drugs to the world, and Emma has heard rumors about it. Emma thinks it's a bad idea to put all mutants on a single island. It paints a giant target on their backs, and Emma isn't interested in using the Hellfire Corporation to help them distribute the drugs. But as usual, Charles has bigger plans. He wants Emma's help to form a government, a mutant government. Emma is short-tempered, and the sound of a mutant government blows her fuse as she screams, "A government for a nation that doesn't exist? Based on the economic ramifications of an imaginary drug? In a world that historically would rather kill us than trust us? Aren't the two of you getting a little ahead of yourselves?" And while Charles has been the one speaking all this while, this is when Eric feels the need to interrupt the conversation. It's not only Emma who has a short fuse. Magneto is famous for it as well. He interjects as he tells Emma about Krakoa's population growth. The island is about to house 100,000 mutants by the next month, and within the next 3 months, this number is expected to grow 5 times. And by the same time next year, they estimate a population of around 2 million mutants. "We are not ahead of ourselves, Miss Frost. We are woefully behind," says Magneto. Emma realizes that Charles and Derek are dead serious as she holds her head. They inform her that this is the day Emma's been waiting for, that this is the time to make things right. Magneto then pulls out a gateway flower and takes them all back to Krakoa. And when Emma reaches the island, it hits her home. She sighs as she stands over a cliff and says, "One more time then, for the children." "All right, I'm in. Tell me what you need." This is what Charles has been waiting to hear. He eagerly informs Emma of his latest venture. Charles is manufacturing miracle drugs through multiple shell companies. The way this process has been compartmentalized and structured makes intellectual theft impossible. However, when it comes to distribution of the drug, they can't trust anyone. Well, not any human company at least, which is where the Hellfire Corporation comes in, as they already have international reach. Emma likes the sound of this, and Magneto tries to formalize the arrangement by offering Frost a 20-year contract. This doesn't sit well with Emma, who visibly frowns. Magneto coughs and corrects himself, offering her a 50-year contract this time, which she accepts. Charles then takes over the conversation, offering Emma 2 seats on the Council of Krakoa, the first government of Krakoa. "Okay, but why 2 seats?" asks Emma tentatively as her eyes narrow. She already suspects what's coming but wants to hear it from them both. Charles and Eric look at each other for a second as Xavier replies, "We need you to bring Sebastian Shaw into the Hellfire." Emma doesn't like the sound of it, especially after she managed to get rid of Shaw only a few months ago. But Charles emphasizes that they need Shaw. Countries that don't align with Krakoa, countries that officially don't partner with Krakoa, will need the services of Shaw, the Black King, to run the Black Book operations, of course. They need Shaw to get the drugs into these countries and to get the mutants out. Emma thinks for a moment and then agrees to their term, but she has a condition. She doesn't want 2 seats on the council. She wants 3 of them. Now, before we move any further into the next part of the story, let's quickly take a look at the Council of Krakoa, formerly known as the Quiet Council of Krakoa. It's composed of 12 seats, divided into 4 sections each: autumn, winter, spring, and summer. There's a separate section named Krakoa dedicated for Cypher and Krakoa, overlooking the council. The current members of the council include Xavier and Magneto in autumn, and Emma Frost and Sebastian Shaw in spring. Now, let's continue with the story. Back on Krakoa, Charles and Derek meet with Moira in her No Place, which also houses one of Charles's Cerebro cradles. Moira faked her death to the entire world and thus spends most of her time in this No Place. Only Charles and Derek know about her as they talk about taking the final plunge, their final leap of faith in this plan. Cerebro is placed in the cradle, and the talk of the final plunge seems to weigh heavy on Magneto. On Eric, he places his hand on Charles's shoulder and says, "Whatever has been there between us over the years, all our disagreements, all the anger at the other's relentless ideology and unyielding persistence, that ends today, you have my word." This is the confidence, the push Charles needed. He places his hand gently on Eric's as a gesture of gratitude and picks up Cerebro. With the love of his life and his best friend by his side, Xavier feels more complete than ever. He puts on the Cerebro and connects to the entire world. He's taking the proverbial leap of faith. He says, "Humans of planet Earth, I am the mutant Charles Xavier, and I bring you a message of hope." Everyone around the world can hear Charles. Corporations, civilians, military installation, the Avengers, Fantastic Four, mutants, Karima Sharpanda, Orkis, everyone. "Recognize us." Charles informs the world that mutant scientists have created 3 miracle drugs for the humans. One that extends human life by 5 years, another that's a universal super antibiotic that can cure most diseases, and the last one, capable of healing any ailments of the mind. As he continues, Xavier says that in the past these drugs would have been a gift from him to mankind, in hopes of a better future, in hopes of harmony, but he's learned a harsh lesson over the years, and thus it won't be a gift anymore. Charles reminds mankind of the 16 million mutants killed in the Genosian genocide. He informs the world that they can pay for these drugs, plain and simple. And all mutants ask in return are 2 things. First, humans must accept Krakoa as the nation-state of all mutants on Earth, and second, all mutants born on Earth can claim Krakoan citizenship. Charles further adds that they're ready to go through the entire process with the UN that any newly formed nation has to. The only catch is that their sovereignty needs to be recognized. People around the world gaze toward the sky as they listen to Charles. Charles adds that with Krakoan citizenship comes amnesty, and that includes all the mutants that have been singled out as criminals by man. Punished or imprisoned, they'll be handed over to Krakoa to face Krakoan justice. "These are our demands, and they're not negotiable. In return for making our lives better, we'll do the same for you. And if you find yourself asking, who are these mutants to think that they can dictate terms to us? We are the future, an evolutionary inevitability, the Earth's true inheritors. Here is a new truth. While you slept, the world changed," Charles concludes. Before moving further, let's take a look at these drugs developed by the mutants. They're made from the same 3 types of Krakoan flowers we discussed earlier. The first one is called Human Drug L. It helps extend the lifespan by 5 years and is made from the Gateway flower. The second one, Human Drug I, is made from the Habitat flower and is a super antibiotic against most diseases. The third is Human Drug M and is made from the No Place flower. This drug helps cure any diseases of the brain. Now, back to the story. Habitat flowers planted by Charles around the world have now grown to their full size. They've created habitats, places of refuge for mutants in each city. Over the next month, diplomats from around the world are given a tour of these habitats, while they're also used to transport mutants back to Krakoa. We learn that Krakoa and Cypher, along with Sage, keep a close eye on the gateways while accounting for every mutant entering or leaving the island. And the latest incoming batch of mutants includes Marvel Girl herself, Jean Grey, who accompanies a young mutant, barely 8 years old. As they reach Krakoa, the young mutant is wary of the new place. That is, until he sees Professor X and Wolverine in the distance. He screams with excitement as he runs toward them. This is the safe haven Charles wanted to make, and it's now finally become a reality. But for how long? Not long, apparently. as we see Dr. Alia Gregor land on a space station near the Sun. She's accompanied by Omega, aka Karima Sharpanda, and they land and survey the station. It's mostly empty, except for the security crew monitoring everything. This space station has been developed by Orcus, a covert organization managed by secret organizations of the world, namely AIM, SHIELD, Strike, SWORD, Alpha Flight, Hammer, Armor, and Hydra. This space station was developed as the last resort in case of a doomsday scenario which falls under the Orcus protocol, and the protocol has already been activated. The protocol was automatically enacted when algorithms predicted the extent of what Xavier is planning to do. Dr. Gregor and Omega are here to oversee the enactment of the protocol. We learned that the space station was built by the Sentinels, who are now on Mercury, mining more resources, and once Omega and Dr. Gregor reach the viewing window, we see what their doomsday plan actually is. It's a mother mold. Well, let's take a pause and familiarize ourselves with the Sentinels. Sentinels are AI robots developed to hunt any and every mutant in sight. Sentinels are manufactured by Master Mold, a larger AI robot designed to manufacture and manage Sentinel. Orcus had always been wary of mutants, so this time, in this reality, instead of a Master Mold, they built a Mother Mold. A Mother Mold is capable of manufacturing Master Molds, which in turn can manufacture Sentinels. You can see the immense threat they pose to Xavier's plans. Now, back to the story. Pivotal infiltration. We see damage control is a mess, a facility jointly owned by Tony Stark and Reed Richards. Bodies are piled up on the floor as we spot the culprit. It's Sabretooth, and he's on a rampage. Accompanied by Mystique and Toad, Sabretooth continues slicing one guard after the other as Mystique grows weary of the scenario. They were supposed to keep a low profile. Toad hacks damage control systems, trying to look for something as Mystique presses him to get the job done faster. Toad mentions that he needs to clear their tracks digitally, something that's futile considering the scene Sabretooth has created. A few minutes later, Toad is done and the trio make their escape. Mystique shoots a large hole in the side of the building, and the next moment they're leaping through the air and onto the street below. But their escape is short-lived as Sabretooth's back gets engulfed in flames. It's Human Torch and the Thing from the Fantastic Four. Sabretooth faces the two of them as Mystique and Toad escape in the background. The Thing is flinging Sabretooth around like a rag doll, but he finally manages to find his ground as they near the Krakoan gateway. Mystique and Toad leap through it, but as soon as Sabretooth jumps towards the gateway, he gets trapped in an invisible force field box, courtesy of the Invisible Woman, aka Mrs. Fantastic, who's joined by Mr. Fantastic. The entire team is here, and Sabretooth has been captured. The triumph, however, is short-lived as the Krakoan gateway becomes active again and out walks Cyclops, someone they don't wish to mess with. Despite their apprehension, Cyclops greets the Richards family as a dear friend, but tensions soon arise when Cyclops demands Sabretooth. He reminds Mr. Fantastic, aka Reed Richards, about the amnesty Sabretooth has, thanks to Krakoa. But Reed has no intentions of giving him up, considering the countless murders committed by the mutant. For a second there, it seems Cyclops might fight the Fantastic Four, but he decides against it. Promising to deal with it some other day, Cyclops eases the tension by wishing the Richards family well. And as he bids them goodbye, he says, "Please greet your son for me, and tell him when he's ready, he has a family on Krakoa waiting for him." But when Cyclops reaches Krakoa, there are more pressing matters at hand as Charles calls him in for a meeting. Charles has schematics up on the large screen. This is what Mystique stole from the damage control facility, the Mother Mold schematics. And when Cyclops asks what he's looking at, Charles replies, "A nightmare, a waking one, and the beginning of the end, unless I'm mistaken." Charles informs everyone about the Mother Mold and what it's capable of. The schematics tell them that the construction has been completed, but the Mother Mold still lies dormant, waiting to be activated. And considering the schematics and the resources needed to operate the Mother Mold, Charles suspects that the Mother Mold is capable of producing next-generation Sentinels, Nimrod. This obviously is of paramount importance, as Charles goes on to emphasize how they have to destroy Mother Mold, and Cyclops understands. He's ready to do whatever is needed, and he leaves to put a team together. Cyclops has chosen a closely knit team that consists of Wolverine, Marvel Girl, Mystique, Nightcrawler, Penance, Husk, and Archangel. They're gathered at the Krakoan habitat on the blue area of the moon. He starts by informing the team about the Mother Mold and what it's capable of. The task, although humongous, is overshadowed by the real problem they have. They won't be taking any gateway flowers with them. Cyclops tells everyone that they're doing this to avoid the flowers or the gateway from falling into the wrong hands if they fail. They can't imagine the Mother Mold's intelligence yet, but the AI will likely be able to reverse engineer, or worse, use the gateway flowers to its advantage, especially if given enough time. And thus, once the team is briefed, everyone gets inside the modified Shi'ar scout vessel and takes off. Back on Earth, Emma Frost is taking Sabretooth off of the human hands as he was being tried for his crimes at the Project Achilles prison. Though the humans don't wish to part ways with him, Frost has come prepared with all the papers needed for the release. And not to mention, she's one of the few Omega-level mutants on Earth. They wouldn't want to mess with her. Frost manages to convince the humans and they hand over Sabretooth to her, whom she takes back to Krakoa. Back on the Mother Mold space station, Karima and Dr. Gregor talk about the Mother Mold. Karima is a bit apprehensive about humans creating the Mother Mold, and Dr. Gregor goes on to inform her about the measures they put in place in case something goes wrong. Firstly, the mold has been built on a direct trajectory to the sun and is only anchored by 4 control collars. These control collars can be activated to plunge it into the sun in case something goes wrong. Secondly, the AI is still in its infancy, and Dr. Gregor doesn't plan on activating it until it surpasses the Hella Faust line. Dr. Gregor's communicator beeps and she's being contacted by the security chief on the space station, her husband, Erasmus Mendel. It's bad news. They've spotted the X-Men flying in, and they can't stop them, not until they land on the Mother Mold. Their long-range defenses will be easy to evade for the Shi'ar vessel, and while they can hit them at close range, their close-range weapons won't be able to penetrate their shield. Mendel readies a welcome party for the X-Men as he informs Omega that he's already called in the Sentinels from Mercury to aid them. Unfortunately, they won't be able to arrive here in time. Various Sentinels are already on a flight path to the space station, their arms and armor heavily modified to aid with the mining operation. Dr. Gregor is losing hope, but her husband tries to cheer her up. Their only hope is the X-Men will have to dock, and it'll give them enough advantage to buy some time and to repel them, fight them, at least till the Sentinels arrive. Frontal assault. Back in the Shi'ar vessel, Wolverine asks Nightcrawler to conduct recon. They need him to verify the locations of the ejection collars from the schematics they sourced on Earth. If the locations are correct, their job will be a lot easier. Nightcrawler understands. It's an easy task for him as he vanishes from the vessel the very next second. He verifies the first 2 locations, but when he goes to the third one, he stumbles into Dr. Gregor and Omega. Kurt, aka Nightcrawler, has known Omega for a while and is surprised that she's decided to side with the humans. He vanishes before she can finish her reply. The X-Men just gave away one of their tactical advantages. Dr. Gregor and the rest of the security team now know that the X-Men have a teleporter. But as Dr. Gregor is informing her husband about Nightcrawler, there's a loud rumble echoing throughout the entire space station, metal on metal, grinding against one another. Her husband, Erasmus Mendel, is familiar with the noise. He knows the X-Men don't plan to dock, at least not in the traditional sense. We see the Shi'ar vessel has modified landing gears, allowing it to drill and create an opening wherever it lands. Nightcrawler, who's back, informs the rest of the team about Omega's presence on the Mother Mold as they initiate the landing sequence. Erasmus Mendel stands directly beneath them, expecting their entry. However, his team is a little far ahead, scouting the area, and as the Shi'ar vessel begins using a laser to cut a hole in the space station, the chamber depressurizes, prompting the space station to seal off that area, along with Mendel, trapped inside. Plasma and sparks of metal rain down on Mendel as he informs his wife about the situation. His words cryptic, yet caring. He plans to do something he knows will be the last thing he does in his life. He begins disassembling his plasma rifle. On the other end, his wife slowly realizes her husband's intention, tears streaming down her face as he builds a crude bomb from his rifle's power source. "Be strong, love. Don't let them win," are his last words as he triggers the bomb. His wife, Dr. Alia Gregor, still screaming for him to stop on the other end. The next second, a large explosion echoes through the space station as Mendel's bomb goes off right beneath the Shi'ar vessel. It takes apart a good chunk of the space station, and the vessel along with it. Mendel is no more. Dr. Xavier is eager to establish contact with the team in space back on Krakoa. He's assembled Storm, Beast, the Cuckoos, and Magneto in a secluded underground chamber. Beast has retasked a couple of SETI satellites, and although they're still 8 light minutes behind for real-time communication, Charles uses his powers and Cuckoos to join every mind in the room together so they can act as a single organism, a single brain to negate the delay in communication with the team. The Cuckoos join everyone's mind as Charles establishes contact with Jean. His mind instantly fills with pain and fear. Jean, pain and fear. Charles presumes the worst has happened as Jean informs him of their dire situation. Half of the vessel's roof has been blown clean off. Archangel and Husk are dead. Logan has his left arm completely torn off his shoulder. Nightcrawler has suffered internal injuries and likely has internal bleeding. Charles is saddened to hear that, but his determination to see the mission finished is undeterred. "Can you complete the mission?" he asks, and Jean doesn't know what to say. It's then that Cyclops takes over, informing Charles, informing each member of his team that they have to do it, for the sake of their dead teammates, or else their sacrifice will be in vain. Cyclops has a plan. They'll use Nightcrawler to get team members at each of the control collars so that they can be disengaged one by one. Jean and Penance will stay on the ship to continue communicating with Earth. Wolverine is set to take the control collar nearest to the space station security hub. Mystique will take the one nearest to the habitat as she'll be able to blend in, and Cyclops and Nightcrawler will take care of the remaining 2 control collars. Back inside the space station, Dr. Alia Gregor lies on the ground on her knees. crying uncontrollably as fire rages on in the background. Omega asks the good doctor to get up to do what needs to be done. She's the one with the power and command authority. Omega is just an observer on the Mother Mold. Like Cyclops, Omega asks Dr. Gregor to push through, or else her husband's death would have been in vain. Slowly but surely, the doctor's sorrow turns to rage as she commands the remaining security teams to guard the rest of the control collars. She and Omega will take care of the nearest collar, the one closest to the space station habitat. The doctor is busy giving out new commands to a security team when a loud noise echoes through the space station. It sounds as though a tension beam of solid metal finally gave way. It's Wolverine and Nightcrawler. They've already managed to disengage two of the collars as Omega and Dr. Gregor look out of the window. Back on the vessel, Jean is busy communicating with Xavier, informing him of everything that's happened so far when she's suddenly interrupted by Penance. They're being boarded, and Jean needs to leave quickly using an escape pod. She resists, but Penance is having none of it. She looks back at Jean one last time and then presses the release. Jean's escape pod shoots into space as Penance readies herself to take on the security teams boarding the vessel. She transforms and brings the fight to them, tearing two officers in half with a single strike. At the Mother Mold, Cyclops manages to disengage his control collar with a loud clank, and the Mother Mold now barely hangs on by one collar, the one supposed to be disengaged by Mystique. Cyclops radios her, trying to get an update as we see Mystique approach her collar's lever without any resistance. It shouldn't be this easy. Something doesn't feel right. She looks back and finds Dr. Gregor and Omega staring at her from the habitat's doorway. But it's too late when Mystique realizes what's about to happen. Too late. Dr. Gregor opens the airlock as Mystique tries to reach the lever. The depressurization, however, is unparalleled. Poor Mystique is quickly sucked into the vacuum of space. Necessary sacrifices. Dr. Gregor seals off the habitat with the airlock still open, hoping to keep the other X-Men out. She then goes to a computer, types in a few keystrokes, and then her password. Omega's eyes widen with surprise as the space station's computer begins counting down. Mother Mold boot in 30 seconds. 29 seconds. Dr. Gregor no longer cares if the Mother Mold is too young or not, ready or not. It's time she took the fight to her adversaries, and she has another race up her sleeve, an AIM translocator. Cyclops and Jean inform Charles about the Mother Mold coming online, and he has only one thing to say: do whatever it takes. Cyclops understands what that means as he stares at the Mother Mold out of a viewing window. Only 10 seconds remain as the Mother Mold begins its startup sequence. Wolverine and Kurt come running as Scott lowers his head. This will require sacrifice, and Scott knows it all too well. He doesn't need to ask, though. Wolverine and Nightcrawler already know what needs to be done. Logan is the only one that can survive long enough in space thanks to his healing factor, and Kurt is the only one that can get him there. Their last words are about what comes after death. Kurt has always had faith in the chip, and Logan hasn't. Worried about your soul, Logan? Asks Kurt, and Logan looks in the distance as he replies, just, wondering what someone like me should expect. Kurt places his hand on Logan's shoulder and says, when you wake from this earthly slumber, my friend, look for me. I will be waiting there for you, radiant and with open arms. And poof, they're gone the very next second. Kurt evaporates into dust instantly upon landing on the control collar. Logan's body begins to disintegrate slowly as his healing factor tries to kick in desperately. He begins chopping down the collar with his adamantium claws, screaming each time as he loses more and more of his limbs, more and more of his face. To his right, the Mother Mold has managed to come online, but its AI, still in its infancy, looks at Logan and rambles, if man made me, then they are God, and you are Titans, their spoiled lineage. But while you war, we children sit in judgment of those above us. We judge and find you both wanting. Logan looks at the Mother Mold in anger. He's more than halfway through the collar now. He readies himself and takes one last swipe, and the collar breaks free. The Mother Mold plunges into the sun as it continues saying, do you hear us, Olympus? We have stolen your fire, and with it we will burn you all. Cyclops looks on as his dear friend plunges into the sun, slowly turning into dust, losing and healing every inch of his body at the same time. He can't imagine what Logan's going through, but he's always been the bravest man Scott has ever known. Scott informs about their success back on Krakoa, but nobody celebrates. The price they paid is huge. Scott runs through the hallway, planning an escape when Jean lets Scott know that her escape pod is floating endlessly. Scott knows about it and plans to get to her using an EVA suit. He can then use his powers to push them toward Earth. While not a great plan, it's the best they have. Or was. Scott is suddenly hit by a plasma cannon. He won't be able to make it. Dr. Gregor and Omega tower over him, holding all the firepower possible in their hands. Dr. Gregor is out for revenge, and she takes aim and blows Scott's head clean off of his torso. They've lost Cyclops, and it's not looking good for Jean either as her escape pod gets ambushed by Sentinel. They tear apart her escape pod as we see them huddle over it in the vastness of space. Charles has lost them all. Tears stream down his face uncontrollably, conquering the only weakness, death. Back on Krakoa, Magneto talks with his daughter, Lorna Dane, aka Polaris. They're in a large underground chamber overlooking a huge tree with glowing orange pods nestled in its roots. Charles and Storm enter the room with 5 mysterious mutants in their wake. "Here they come," says Magneto as he explains to his daughter about the mysterious 5. Apart from building a new nation, a new Cerebro, Charles has also been busy studying mutants that were once considered useless by the world. The first of the 5 is Fabio Medina, a mutant with the power to produce unlimited benign golden balls. At first considered useless, Charles and the rest soon realized that these golden balls were eggs. While Magneto explains, Fabio produces 7 golden balls and nestles them on the ground. They grow to large human-sized eggs with each passing second. The second of the 5 is Proteus, a mutant with the ability to manipulate reality. And when Proteus touches the eggs and warps reality slightly, it makes the eggs viable. It's then that these eggs can be injected with the DNA of any mutant. Elixir, the life-giving mutant, is the next step in the process. He bends down and touches each egg one by one, seemingly kickstarting the process of cellular replication in each embryo. And now, all they need is time, something that Eva Bell can control. She musters her powers and makes time move faster for each of the 7 embryos on the ground, and then they all hold hands and stand circling the eggs they created. This is where the final member of the 5 comes in, Hope. She has the power to unify each member of the 5, regulating and enhancing the powers of each member in the process. Polaris looks on in awe as Magneto stands behind her, eagerly anticipating what's about to come. We then see what Charles has planned all along. The roots of the tree that we saw earlier come into view. The glowing orange pods, they're all eggs. And then it happens. A hand sprouts from one of the eggs, and then from another. It's Jean and Scott. Soon, all the eggs the 5 created give birth to the remaining members of the team lost in the fight for the Mother Mold in space. Charles towers them like a father, but also like a god, as he calls to them, "To me, my X-Men." And while impressed, Polaris still wonders how these bodies can even act like their former selves. They're just shells. And that's when Magneto interjects her, imploring her to watch on. Charles holds Cyclops' head in his hand, puts his iconic ruby and quartz monocle on Scott's eyes, and then, the very next second, uses Cerebro to imprint Scott's latest backup onto the shell. Scott's body arcs and throws back with the sudden influx of information, of sentience. Charles then proceeds to do the same for the rest of the mutants. Marvel Girl, Nightcrawler, Wolverine, Husk, Archangel, Mystique, and Penance. They're all back, alive, reincarnated. Every mutant on Krakoa is assembled under a large tree as Storm, the 5 and the newly born mutant slowly walk out of an opening in it. Storm introduces them to the new world, their new nation one by one, and everybody cheers them on. Everybody reveres the 5, for they and Charles can bring anyone back to life. Over the next few days, it's all celebrations for Krakoa. They get approved by the UN Security Council thanks to Emma Frost and her persuasive ways. Now, Krakoa is finally a country recognized by the majority of nations in the world, and once this happens, it doesn't take long for Charles to extend an invitation to every mutant on Earth, friend or foe. We see that the next time Charles talks to all the mutants on Earth using Cerebro, everyone pays attention to him, even mutants that would have once considered him their enemy. He personally goes and extends his hand to them, virtually manifesting himself using Cerebro. And by everyone, Charles means everyone. He approaches mutants like Exodus, the supervillain, Mr. Sinister, Omega Red and his affiliates, Gorgon, and Namor, the Atlantean mutant hybrid. And although most of them agree to join Charles on Krakoa, Namor refuses. His position as the king of Atlantis is good enough for him, and believing Charles is a commodity he can't currently afford. In the coming days, mutants from around the world make their way to Krakoa. Mutants that were shunned by society, outcasts, villains, and criminals all make their way to the sentient island, their home. This doesn't please Wolverine, who's on edge considering the number of enemies from his past that'll be joining them on the island. But Charles has hope. No, this time he has more than hope. This time he believes. And so the remaining mutants arrive on Krakoa. Mr. Sinister, Gorgon, Exodus, and of course, Apocalypse. And as Apocalypse arrives on Krakoa, he's greeted by the island. Birds flock around him as he talks to his old friend, Krakoa. Wolverine, still wary of Apocalypse's ways, has his claws drawn as Magneto talks to him. They need assurance that Apocalypse will abide by the laws of Krakoa, and Apocalypse is more than happy to comply. This is what he always wanted, for Mutantkind to take their rightful place in this world. And he speaks for all the mutants, all the villains that have arrived with him on this day, as he says, "We submit to the laws of this land, be what they may, and acknowledge that from this day forward, we all serve a higher purpose than want or need. One people from this day forward." That's all Charles needed to hear as he moves in, his arm stretched toward Apocalypse. And as the two shake hands, Xavier says, "Welcome home." The first council task, Judgment. The Quiet Council of Krakoa is now finally complete. Autumn is occupied by Professor X, Magneto, and Apocalypse. Winter is occupied by Mr. Sinister, Exodus, and Mystique. Sebastian Shaw, Emma Frost, and the unnamed Red Queen make up the spring section of the council, and Storm, Marvel Girl, and Nightcrawler form the summer section. Charles and Eric make their way to Moira's no place on the island with T to inform her of the council's completion. But Moira isn't happy with the number of villains they've decided to put on the council. Charles, however, thinks otherwise. He feels it's better to have these people close by rather than out of sight, which leaves only one pressing matter at hand, something that makes Moira twitch with anger. The promise Charles and Eric made to Mystique. They promised to bring back Destiny. Moira's mortal counterpart. Charles and Eric tell Moira that they plan to put off bringing back Destiny for years to come, but there'll come a time when they'll need to bring her back. A time when they'll need to tell everyone the truth, that they always lose. Moira isn't happy about this at all, but Charles feels differently as he says, "The truth is that until now we've always lost, but this time it's going to be different, for we are different, and that's because of you," adds Eric as the two stand side by side as friends, as family. The Quiet Council of Krakoa convenes the next day, ready to decide the fate of Sabretooth, ready to commence their first trial. The atmosphere is tense, but everybody is aware of the power dynamics at play and the immense cost of Krakoa's future on their shoulders. And although Sabretooth is spewing venom from his mouth, his threats don't bother the council. They talk, debate, and conjecture endlessly until finally arriving at a satisfying conclusion, establishing 3 laws for Krakoa in the process. The first 3 laws of their mutant nation. The first law of Krakoa: make more mutants. The second law of Krakoa: murder no man. The third law of Krakoa: respect this sacred land. And as Sabretooth has broken the second law, he can't be forgiven. Judgment has been chasing Sabretooth all his mutant life, and it's finally arrived. He's found guilty by the council, and so, roots sprout from the ground like tentacles, grabbing onto Sabretooth tightly, pulling him toward a deep, endless chasm in the ground. Sabretooth curses and flails around as he falls. Charles lets him know that killing or imprisonment isn't an option on Krakoa. Thus, he'll be in stasis, inside Krakoa, for the foreseeable future, until there comes a time when Sabretooth can redeem himself. With that concludes the first council meeting of Krakoa. It's all been a success. Charles' dream has finally come true. Charles and Magneto part ways from the council as the rest of them go on to join tonight's celebrations. Every mutant on the island is in the mood to celebrate. Fireworks light up the night sky, glittering the ground with shades of the rainbow. Everyone sings, dances, uses their powers to celebrate, igniting the night sky at the slightest sight of darkness. Exodus gathers the children around a campfire, enthralling them with tales of the past and future. Wolverine walks around with a six-pack in hand, sharing drinks with friends and enemies. Enemies from his past like Gorgon, enemies that are now friends. Jean looks on and is inspired to do the same. She approaches Emma Frost with a drink, a gesture of peace, and Frost can't help but smile and comply. They all have longed for a family, a home, a place that they can call their own, and this time they have it. Apocalypse sits under a tree with his eyes closed and a smile on his face. This is what he's longed for, fought for millenniums. And after all this time, his dream too has finally come true. The oldest mutant wants to savor every moment of this. He sits there, peacefully registering every moment to his memory. Marvelous verdict. House of X and Powers of X are a phenomenal soft reboot for the X-Men. The art by Pepe Larraz and Mark Gracia breathes new life into characters we've known and seen for years. Each panel's crafted with intent, reflecting emotions and tensions with prowess. The writing by Jonathan Hickman is complex, but manages to convey a lot in a short amount of time. The way the story jumps between the two comics, the way tension builds up, and the cliffhangers are all expertly crafted to keep you on the edge of your seat. Each reveal is fantastic and satisfying without giving away what comes next. The dialogues are meaningful and never break the flow, and the inclusion of panels that exploit information as if you're reading a classified file further immerses you in this new world. The way Hickman decided to tie each loose thread in the X-Men universe while paving a path for future storylines is nothing short of perfection. Although a bit difficult and disjointed at first, the story picks up pace rather quickly, tying each loose end with perfection. House of X and Powers of X are a perfect read, even if you aren't a fan of the X-Men. The storytelling itself should have you captivated if you love sci-fi.